My father was, and still is, a legend to me. I know this might sound like just another cliché, but it's crucial you understand this, especially since everything I'm about to share might make me seem a bit unhinged. He was an anthropologist by profession, and, even as a child, I could tell he loved people deeply. His fascination with humanity showed in the quirky Hawaiian shirts he wore during impromptu barbecues, in how he enthusiastically greeted every barista and bank teller, and in the way his laughter lit up the room, making everyone around him want to laugh too. People seemed to adore him in return. He wrote extensively, and his engaging personality shone through in his books, which sold remarkably well. After one book, in particular, a bestseller about human legends from our home state of Colorado, he decided we should buy a vacation home. Looking back, it feels almost comically ironic, but I'll get to that. The house was in a small Welsh town called Aradr, perched right by the sea. The town formed a half-circle along the coastline, flanked by rugged cliffs. In the center of that curve lay a tiny island, little more than a large rock with a few small caves and a handful of homes, called Morgan's Path. I only spent a few summers there, but those memories are incredibly dear to me. My father was fascinated by the area, not just for his love of Welsh culture, which had mostly faded, but also for a couple of notable attractions in the town that stand out in my mind. My father was, and still is, a legend to me. I know this might sound like just another cliché, but it's crucial you understand this, especially since everything I'm about to share might make me seem a bit unhinged. He was an anthropologist by profession, and, even as a child, I could tell he loved people deeply. His fascination with humanity showed in the quirky Hawaiian shirts he wore during impromptu barbecues, in how he enthusiastically greeted every barista and bank teller, and in the way his laughter lit up the room, making everyone around him want to laugh too. People seemed to adore him in return. He wrote extensively, and his engaging personality shone through in his books, which sold remarkably well. After one book, in particular, a bestseller about human legends from our home state of Colorado, he decided we should buy a vacation home. Looking back, it feels almost comically ironic, but I'll get to that. The house was in a small Welsh town called Aradr, perched right by the sea. The town formed a half-circle along the coastline, flanked by rugged cliffs. In the center of that curve lay a tiny island, little more than a large rock with a few small caves and a handful of homes, called Morgan's Path. I only spent a few summers there, but those memories are incredibly dear to me. My father was fascinated by the area, not just for his love of Welsh culture, which had mostly faded, but also for a couple of notable attractions in the town that stand out in my mind. In the evening, or when a thick mist enveloped the town, a haunting melody could be heard drifting in from the ocean, reminiscent of someone playing a flute, distant and mournful. My father believed it was the wind slipping through the gaps in Morgan's Passage and echoing back across the water, mingling with the sounds of the ocean-soaked rocks. During the day, he said, the town dulled the song, but at night, we would sit in the backyard together, listening to the island's eerie serenade from the dark waters. On starry nights, we could also glimpse tiny, twinkling lights floating above the dark sea. They appeared in clusters, seeming to rise and fall as if dancing atop the waves. My father thought these were tricks of twilight or reflections from something on the island, and he found them beautiful, like jewels glimmering on the water. I gazed at him in wonder, completely enchanted. I was just 9 when he disappeared. He had decided to venture out that day, as he often did, in our small boat. I had asked to join him, but he said no. I still don't know why. Maybe I had been particularly insistent in the days leading up to it, or perhaps he was planning something risky. As darkness fell, he hadn't returned, and he never would. They found the boat wrecked against the cliffs a few miles down the coast, but there was no sign of him. Though such accidents weren't unheard of in the area, they were rare, and eventually, it was ruled an accidental drowning. Search efforts turned up nothing, and my mother and I were left to bury an empty coffin, marking the worst day of our lives. Financially, we were secure, thanks to my father's savings supplementing my mother's income, but we couldn't bear to go back to the place where everything had happened. While my mother clung to the memories, I felt suffocated by the weight of the house, which fell into disrepair over the years. 11 years later, just after turning 20, I faced an early life crisis and decided it was time to confront the past. My mother hated my choice. If it were up to her, we would let the house decay into nothingness. But I was determined. Before she could truly intervene, I was off to Cardiff Airport. I opted to stay in a small inn near Arad instead of the old estate, which turned out to be wise. Upon arriving at the dilapidated country house, I saw it was in a state of severe neglect. The ocean's proximity had taken a toll on the exterior, and the once tidy garden had become a tangle of weeds. Inside, most of the house remained untouched, except for one room that had been ruined by a hole in the roof, with dust covering everything else. As evening approached, I decided to return to the inn and plan my next steps. Just before leaving, I glanced back, half hoping to see my father sitting on the steps, but there was only silence. After a restless night, I resolved to spend the next day on the water. I gathered supplies from a dingy little shop and rented a boat from the harbor. As I drifted into the ocean, I felt as if I were reliving my father's last day, staring out over the sparkling waves. My gaze caught on a small cave nestled into the rugged side of Morgan's Passage. For a moment, I considered exploring it, but I stopped myself. I had seen others turned away by watchboats, warned that it was too dangerous to approach. Still, a tiny part of me wondered if maybe they hadn't checked in a while. Perhaps it wasn't as hazardous as they claimed. I shook my head, trying to banish the foolish thoughts. I was there to face the truth, not to embark on a reckless adventure. I anchored a safe distance from the island and settled in for a day of fishing, but I didn't catch anything. The fish had dwindled over the years, and even the nostalgia of our past fishing trips could not distract me from the nagging thought of the cave. As night fell, darkness enveloped the sky like ink, and I found myself closer to the cave than I intended. I realized I wouldn't find peace unless I at least took a look. With no watchboats patrolling in the cover of darkness, I moored my boat as close as I could to the rocky shore and waded toward the cave's entrance. As I stumbled over the wet rocks, I felt the familiar ring of my keychain in my pocket. Pulling it out, I switched on the small flashlight I kept attached to it, casting its weak beam into the shadows. Just then, I heard rustling behind some large stones ahead. My heart raced as I shone the light in that direction and stumbled back, shocked to see a figure emerge from the shadows. At first, I hesitated, but as my eyes adjusted, I recognized him, my father, though older and scruffier than I remembered. He stood partially hidden in the shadows of the cave's entrance. Joy surged within me, and I stepped forward, ready to embrace him. But he recoiled, retreating further into the cave, his voice ragged and hoarse. "Time is almost up, Carter," he urged, motioning for me to follow him deeper into the cave. I was stunned by the surreal nature of the moment. His sudden appearance and the way he withdrew further into the cave left me no choice but to follow. At that moment, it felt like the only thing I could do. His steps were quick and assured, while mine stumbled over the smooth stones beneath my feet. He stayed just at the edge of my flashlight's beam, forcing me to keep up as he pressed forward. "There's no time for reunions, but I promise you, we'll have that chance soon," he said, his voice urgent. "For now, I just need you to trust me." Exhausted from our fast pace, questions burned on the tip of my tongue, yet I couldn't voice them. The cave walls seemed to close in, a choking sense of claustrophobia blocking any attempt at speaking. He continued, "Years ago, the day I disappeared, I discovered a ritual site deep in this cave. I don't remember much after that until 2 days ago. I woke up here, with the ritual site glowing around me. I managed to figure out the date from a passing boat, but I don't know what happened." His words tumbled forward. "Carter, I'm so sorry for being gone this long, but something's happening here tonight. I don't know what it is, but we have to stop it, and I need your help." My head spun with the flood of information, struggling to keep up as I followed his swift pace. I stumbled briefly, catching myself with a scrape on the rocky ground. Yet the second I stopped, so did he. Slowly, I stood and took a step forward, and he matched it. Each time I moved, he moved too, always staying just at the edge of my flashlight beam. "Come on," he urged, his tone suddenly sharper, almost hungry. "We need to keep moving." The realization hit me. All this urgency, all this information flooding me, it was a way to keep me from thinking. But now I was thinking. Sure, it was a plausible story. My father was a curious man, an anthropologist who wouldn't resist the mystery of an apparent ritual site in a hidden cave. But something felt wrong. My father, of all people, would have spent time reconnecting with me, not just rushing me deeper into darkness. With a firm grip on my keychain, I stepped forward and swung my flashlight directly onto him. He flinched, moving back fast, but not fast enough. Finally, I saw him clearly. He looked like my father, a battered, aged version. But his limbs seemed just a bit too long, his shoulders set unnaturally, his teeth too large for his mouth, and his eyes, empty, glossy, fake, like taxidermy eyes, a poor imitation of life. My father was an anthropologist, and I know a person when I see one. This wasn't him. The next few minutes are a blur in my memory. I ran back the way I'd come, slipping on algae-slick stones, hearing him, and others, chasing close behind. Their frantic scrabbling sounded like claws on wet stone. I kicked rocks behind me, desperate to slow them down. Somehow I reached my boat, flinging myself in and speeding away from the island without a backward glance. That brings me to today. I didn't sleep a wink last night. All night I researched, trying to piece together what happened. From what I can gather, the beginning of the story he told might have been true. My father likely found the cave and ventured in, hoping for an anthropological discovery. But I'm convinced now, more than ever, that he didn't find anything human in there, and that he's been dead a long time. Do you know the origin of the name Morgan's Isle? I didn't. I thought it was just another geographical name. But Morgan, or Moran, is actually a Welsh term for a creature that lures people to their doom, like a siren. I believe these are the beings I encountered in the cave. They're likely responsible for the disappearances of countless locals and visitors over the years, including my father. Now, as I record this, I'm sitting on the back porch of our old vacation home, my flight scheduled for tomorrow morning. Yet something drew me here tonight, urging me to look over the dark sea one last time. I hope it wasn't the call that brought me, the haunting, beautiful melody that drifts up from the cliffs, so much sweeter than it ever sounded years ago. I can see the faint sparkle of the water now, the flecks of light rolling hypnotically with each wave. I feel sick to my stomach. My father was wrong, they aren't jewels. Looking at them now, I see them for what they truly are. Fake. Dead. Hollow, like taxidermy.